Hello, Lindsay. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello, Jim.
Yeah, I'm here. I lost everybody for a minute.
Okay, great, guys. We had some technical issues there. Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to our fifth episode of the Digital Transformation webinar series. I am one of your hosts, Mark, project management consultant out of Kingston, Jamaica. Would like to introduce myself.
Mark, you're breaking up. Lindsay, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay, Mark, you're breaking up. I'm going to continue. Welcome everyone to the Achieving Digital Transformation Success with Lindsay Leaker. Is it Leaker or Leiker?
It's Leiker.
Leiker. Okay, thank you. She's from CORA Systems, and she's going to talk to us today about digital transformation. Now, this session is being recorded, and I believe it's also being broadcast on YouTube at the same time. I don't know how that works, but it is. So she's going to talk to us for about 45 minutes or so on digital transformation success. Now, unusually for us, we're not going to have just sort of a standard presentation. She has a couple of slides she's going to show us, I hope, and then we're just going to talk. She's going to tell us about her journey. We're going to ask her some questions. So I don't think you can hear. Mark was breaking up. Mark Burnett is in Jamaica, maybe having some technical difficulties there. He's a project manager there. My name is Jim Stewart. I'm a project manager and agile coach in the greater Boston area. This is, I think, our fifth session, and I'm going to put all the sessions up on. After we do this one, we'll feature Lindsay for a while, and then we'll come back later and feature all of them on our LinkedIn pages. You can see all of them because they're recorded. So if you want to go ahead and bring up that, I think your next slide, Lindsay, is your bio. Is that correct? Yeah, and
Yes, sir.
I'm going to read a little bit here. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Lindsay, I'll go ahead and sort of brag about you a little bit, and then you can fill in the gaps. So she says she has a passion for continuous process improvement, and her customers, we share that. More than 15 years in operations, all the moving parts of sales forecasting to detailed project management required for digital transformation. That's I have a lot of project management, but not specifically in that. That's cool. She's a senior member of the CORA Systems professional service team, working with one of their largest customers to date, implementing CORA across their entire multi-billion dollar organization. And she has been the senior digital manager at Carrier, supporting three of their business entities. I think we're going to talk about that a little bit as well. And she has experience in sales operations at three previous companies where she established yearly and quarterly matrices and reporting in collaboration with the chief revenue officer and created this 360 lead program with the chief marketing officer and managed working with Salesforce admins, developers, etc. And I guess that's the nutshell of what I wanted to read. If you wanted to expand upon your bio here, or if I've covered it, go right ahead and do that and start right up, Lindsay.
Well, thank you, Jim, for the intro. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm not sure where everybody's listening in from, but it's a pleasure to be with you today. But like Jim was stating, I have held kind of a variety of different careers in my path. I did start in the sales world, moved over to sales operations, and then moved into the digital scene. During my sales career, though, I was typically one of the early adopters or a SME on many of the digital transformation projects. So I was an end user that participated in the projects, helped do UAT testing and things like that. Um, since I was the end user on that side, when I moved into sales operations, then I started managing kind of the business side of it, of the digital transformation projects. So I was helping with setting what the business expectations were, helping with the KPIs that they were hoping to achieve, addressing use cases, and then was involved in UAT training or UAT testing and then training. And that's what kind of gave me the experience when I kind of stepped over the line and jumped into the digital side of the house. I took my past experiences in sales and sales operations and how I was involved in those projects, and what was successful, not successful. And that kind of queued me up for helping when I was with my last company with several of their digital transformation projects, one of them being CORA. That was actually the reason I was hired into the last company, was to help roll out CORA. So a little varied background, but all of it, a lot of it's always been tied to digital transformation projects. So hopefully that, Jim, kind of sums up my background a little bit. I don't know, did you want to start off with any questions before we get going?
No, why don't you start up, and I'll feed you questions that we've thought of, or the PMO leader as we go along, and then if any chat questions come up, we'll save them to the end. So
Okay,
I
perfect.
may interrupt you, but right now, go for it.
Okay, great. So I'm just gonna kill the PowerPoint. I'm not a very PowerPoint person, so just gonna talk to you guys a little bit about some of my experience. And one of the things that I'll kind of start with is, what I think organizations should know before they implement a digital transformation program. And that's kind of a big question in general to ask. I think it also is very situational based on the company and their goals and objectives. But I think there's some obvious things that each or universal things that each company should consider when they're getting ready to do a digital transformation project. First and foremost, executive leadership. If you don't have that, the project's going to fail. It might not even get the funding to get off, get going. So executive leadership, I think first and foremost, is always critical for a digital transformation projects. Also, things I think you need to know before you start to implement is, a lot of times people come and they say, this is the solution that we want. We want to be able to do, like, this is the end game. But and I do this a lot with my current customer, is take me back. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? What are the challenges we're facing? It's great that you know that you want to reduce costs by 2% or increase margin by 1.5%. But why aren't you doing that today? So what is the problem? What are the challenges? What are your struggles that you're facing today to why you need to take on this transformation project, because you think this is going to be the solution in order to achieve those KPIs? So really understanding what that is. So when I'm working with my customers, that's one of the first things when we get into workshops and things like that, is I want you to tell me what's the problem we're trying to solve here. Really important for companies like CORA or any company that is working with you on a digital transformation, that they really understand what the problem is, and then let them try to help you solve that problem. They're the experts in their tools and software that they're bringing forward. But if they are assuming what the problem is, you might not get the end result that you're looking for. So very important to understand that. One of the other things is, I think, establishing your MVP, so your minimal viable product. It would be nice if you could come out with a tool and, like, in a big bang and say, here, this is it, we're done. But typically digital transformation projects are months, sometimes year-long projects, and things change. So it's best to establish a minimal viable as your phase one, and then create iterations along the way. You definitely want to get end user feedback or their management's feedback. So that way you can make those iterations, make those changes, so that when you get to your final phase, you have a very solid product that you're rolling out to the end users, that's not only achieving what the executive leadership is doing or asking it for, but is also a tool or an initiative that your end users are going to buy into and use and support.
And I'd like to jump in with a question if I can, Lindsay. Now
Sure.
I'm a guy that co-hosts a digital transformation webinar. And somebody might ask, what do you mean by what are they there's something not transferring from analog. What are they transferring from to in general, just at a high level? What do people, when you say that, how do you think of it?
So, in most times, digital transformation projects, they're coming. A lot of times, it's coming off one system or systems in a lot of cases
Mhm.
into a new system. So, for instance, for one of my last companies that I worked with, they were coming off 37 applications when they were coming on to CORA, which was
Wow.
going to be a single application. Now, a couple of those stayed in place. Like I don't think we can ever replace email. But we were eliminating, 37, probably 30 applications from their mix, and moving over to CORA to handle all of that.
So it could be
So,
as consolidation as transformation.
yeah, it could be a
Okay.
consolidation,
Mm.
100%.
Okay.
So, but in the example you gave, going from an analog type system or process into something that's more cloud related or things like that, it could be a number of different types of projects.
How do they know? I don't mean to interrupt your
Okay,
flow here, but
great.
go ahead, Mark. Did you want to say something? I was going to ask how an organization.
Yeah.
You talked about.
Well said.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Jim. That's fine. You can go ahead.
All right.
I will go after you.
Okay. So you talked, Lindsay, about them wanting to do this. How do they know if they're ready for this? Maybe you kind of covered that, but how do they know they're at that state where they can do it?
So I think you will, if you're from the digital side of the house, especially, I think there's important things that you do need to have in place before you kind of take off on a digital transformation initiative. I already touched on it, but definitely executive leadership support.
Right.
Got to have that. I think that's a given for most people. Um, Budget allocation, and a realistic budget allocation. Some people throw money at a project but don't have a real understanding of what it's actually going to cost. So, making sure that you have an appropriate budget to actually achieve what you're trying to transform at the end of the day. I think you also need to make sure that you have your end users management support and willingness and ability to participate in the project. Um, Especially from the digital side of the house, you have to have business representation. Digital is not going to know it all. They're not going to know the business. They're not doing these processes and procedures every day. So you've got to have that business involvement. I want to see it on their roadmap, and I want to see it
Yeah.
being prioritized, because it kind of goes back to the previous items I already listed. I also want to see, similar to what I mentioned before, is I want to see their problem statements.
Yeah.
What's going on? Why are we doing this? Why is there a need for this? Um, I want to understand their KPIs, what we're trying to achieve, and making sure that we break those down into. So we're not going for this one big KPI. I want to break that down so we have multiple milestones of KPIs that are leading up to the larger KPI that's most likely coming from the executive team.
Mhm.
And I also want to see, not exactly, that's part of it we'll work through in the project, but I want to see, what are they thinking for their MVP and what are they thinking for their iteration releases. So I think that's everything. That's mainly what I'm going to be looking for. Obviously, when you get into specific projects, there might be less or more of those, but those are the things that if you brought a project to me, those are the things that I'm going to be looking for.
And if they check those boxes, that equals ready, or is it check those boxes plus some other thing where you think that they're good to go, as far as you're concerned?
I would say in general, if they've checked all of these boxes, then I think we've got the support and what we need to get this project going. Like I said, depending on the type of digital transformation project, there might be more boxes that we need to check. But I think generally speaking, I'm going to need to see all of these boxes checked before we're going to move forward.
Mark, I don't know if you had a similar question or if you wanted to chime in with whatever question it is you had. I don't know if we lost him. We may have lost him. He's having some connectivity problems there. So, Lindsay, do you want to continue, or I have some other questions here for you, unless you want to keep rolling along?
Yeah, I would just probably I think we've touched on it a little bit already, but something that I think is important when you're getting ready for these digital transformation projects is establishing a project team that has voices from the various user groups and management. Um, especially if you're rolling out a new transformation project that's going to touch the entire company, very important that you're bringing in especially the end users or the end users managers
Right.
that really understand what the end users are going to be doing and and their processes and their procedures, because ultimately at the end of the day they're the ones that are going to be putting, if we're talking about software, they're going to be the ones putting the information into the system. So we might develop a process that takes 10 clicks. Well, 10 clicks at the end of the day might not be even feasible for end users. So making sure that we're involved in understanding their processes and procedures, and um, getting them involved in UAT testing so we can make changes as needed. Always looking for those forward thinkers in your end user groups, the ones that are going to be more willing to accept change. Having them come and walk alongside you in the project, I think, is also really critical.
Mark, we'll try you again. I see you're connected there. For while we have you, did you have a question that Lindsay hasn't already addressed or haven't asked?
Yes, I'm sure. Some very good points there, Lindsay. I do agree. So earlier, Jim had mentioned that begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
What's the end game? And from my personal experience, digital transformation is like you're writing a story. So
Mm.
sometimes you have an idea what the end should look like. And so that's how you would start. So I also know culture plays a very important role. The culture and the
That's right.
capability of that particular enterprise business. So from your experience, Lindsay, what do you think about these two pillars? One, the culture, and the second one, the capability of that enterprise business or organization.
I think, yes, I didn't call those out specifically, but I think I a little bit touched on both of them when I was kind of going through things that I look for. So I, from a cultural standpoint, 100%, I think your company has to be open to these digital transformation projects, and that's part of why you need the executive leadership, but also kind of your end user management support on these, because if they're not all involved in this, then it's not going to be a successful project. So I think you also need to consider, is your like are your end users, is your company, are they able to take on this change at this point in their journey? If you've gone through several major digital transformation projects recently, your end users or your company just might not be able to take on another project at this point. So I think you need to really kind of take into consideration what's going on in the company, what's been happening recently, what other initiatives do you have going? Because change is always good, but too much change can also cripple you at the same time.
What I've been thinking is, I just very briefly, Lindsay, and for everybody, I'm working at a pharmaceutical now, and Mark knows about this, doing an agile transformation. And everything you said is exactly that. Take the word digital out, put the word agile in, and you have the same thing. And the other thing I would emphasize, and I'm sure you said it in there somewhere, that change management. We've got emails going out and brown bag lunches and this and that. So it's very similar when you get into any kind of a big organizational change to take all the factors you're talking about in mind. Again, mine is very similar to. So I want to observe that. It's very interesting that they're very similar in that respect.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the projects that I have ran have been all agile based. In the most part, you got a little agile fall going on, as I like to call it, in some of them. But I think, you touched on getting buy-in from the end users, and I also think that's hugely important. And it's not something that you start to get right when you're going into UAT testing and getting ready to release. I think it starts at the very beginning of the project, even maybe before it kicks off. Getting people excited about it. At the end of the day, people want to know, what is it? How is it going to affect me?
Right.
So I think getting that information out to them sooner rather than later, creating some excitement around it. I think I've already touched on this, but I'm a big component of getting in the end users into my project teams, and it's definitely into UAT testing, um, for a couple of reasons. One being that they can help influence the product at the end of the day, and that way we work towards a product that they're going to want to use. But also, I use them as kind of spokespeople when I'm trying to get buy-in with the rest of the recommendations. So, they might be on some of the video clips that we cut during the project to show progress. They might have use cases that they've supplied that we then, might be a win for the end user group. So we'll share those out. I try to always incorporate those people when I get into like the training side of the house. Um, People learn differently. Some want documentation. I'm a very visual person. I like videos. So as much as I can record videos all day long, I like to get my champions in there and have them record it. So the people that are doing the training videos, they start to see, familiar faces. So, okay, they're doing this, they're doing the recording, they know my job, they know what it takes. So, we ultimately get that rapport versus, me from the digital side. I've never potentially done their job. So I don't have as
Right.
much credibility and rapport. So I always like to pull those people in, um, you know, through all of the stages of the project. But when I get to training, especially in what I kind of call hype videos every so often, I want to get those people in there and get me off the camera. So that way they have that instant rapport with them.
And we do have a question from the audience. I wonder if it'd be a good time to bring that up. I've got a couple more for you, and Mark probably does, but
Sure.
you ready to entertain one? Brian, we're going to bring you to the stage if you don't mind. Uh,
Jim, I believe we can just ask from
oh, he's
the
only a mobile
Q&A.
device. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So here's the question for you. We'll ask on your behalf, Brian. Here's his question. He's a PMO executive. He says, what are the suggestions or processes you use to identify all those potential impacted stakeholders? Is it a change impact assessment, or are there other tools you suggest?
Um, I'm kind of a relationship person. So I will use any tool out there to try to get instant feedback. But ultimately, I like to go talk to people. Um, so when I'm getting ready to kick off a project, I'll meet with the executive leadership team and get their take and understand who they think who's going to be impacted by the project. And then I'm just going to start going down the list until I get all the way down to the end users. Um, so that also helps me. I take recommendations along the way of who to go talk to because while I'm doing this, I'm also looking for those individuals that I might want to pull into the project, who are going to be my SMEs, who are going to be my champions. Um, but I like to myself just go talk to the end users.
Okay.
Occasionally, I'll put out surveys through various different things, but I
Part,
like to
part of
get
the
in there.
question is actually going back a step, how the actual identification. So you're going to be talking to them. Do you always know? How do you identify who are the stakeholders you want to go see?
So I'll start with the executive leadership and figure out which departments first are being that they believe are impacted, and then I'm going to go talk to those department leaders, and then
Yeah.
essentially I'm just going to keep working my way down, because
Mhm.
again, I'm going to right from the beginning, I'm going to start to try to establish buy-in. And I'm
Love
also
it.
going to go back and look at those things that I think are critical before I start a project. Because if I don't got buy-in past the executive leadership,
Mhm.
then I'm going to go talk to that executive leader if it's even time to do this initiative.
Yeah. That's similar to what we're doing on the Agile one, where my colleague who's an employee and I'm a contractor, he's doing exactly he's going, he identified them, he's meeting with them one-on-one, getting buy-in, talk to them, what are your concerns, what are your issues, rather
Yep.
than a group meeting. So we're on the same. Hopefully that answers Brian's question. I don't know if there's any other tool that anybody would use. I've used stakeholder analysis tools like power interest grids and things like that, salience analysis, but maybe you don't need to use those if you know who they are, and you like the grassroots version of just talk to them, right?
Yeah, I
Okay,
do. So,
building relationships. Mark, any you have a question? I have a few questions. Mark, do you have a question in there? Any you want to ask? I don't want to take all that time. Yeah,
Yes,
he's
I'm sure.
great, great.
So yeah, so with all that said, yeah, yes, those are some great responses, Lindsay. I totally agree. So with all that said, one of the concerns that I've seen in the area is, a lot of businesses, they don't know, you know, they really don't know if their digital transformation ready. Maybe they have it as part of their short, medium, long-term strategy to go digital or to be a part of the digital ecosystem, but they don't know how to measure if they are ready. So from your experience, Lindsay, how do you know if an organization or a business enterprise is ready for digital implementation?
Actually, hey Mark, I think you might have
What
Mark, you might have missed it when you lost contact. She already answered that particular question. She answered the several parameters of when they're ready a few minutes ago. So she has that. I would ask the question of determining the value. How do we determine the value of it? How do we know, how that works? How's that look?
yeah, that's that's a really good question, and I think that's probably in my experience, one of the most challenging ones as well. I think a lot of people see the value, especially the executive leaderships, they see the value in what the project is going to bring and the initiative is going to bring, but sometimes quantifying it at times can be hard, especially like take the last project that's or it was a couple projects ago now, several years ago, the 37 application one. So that one was a little hard to quantify the value out of the gate. Yes, we eliminated 30 applications, and there was cost that went with all of those applications as well. So obviously you could take the cost of that into what the cost of CORA might have been,
Mm,
and you can get that value that way. And out of the gate with that one, we actually didn't create that value. We were close to breaking even, so we really had to look at what were the future phases of this project going to bring, because yes, we eliminated 30 applications with the MVP and release 2, but what was the increased value that we were going to get through the future phases and things like that. So that one turned into a 3-year project at the end of the day,
mhm,
because we had to think long term as far as the value that we were going to get from there. So we started with just the overall costs. We eventually got to reducing costs, um, because we would have had, with new processes and procedures that came out, CORA had the flexibility to allow us to adopt those new processes and procedures into that tool. If we would have stayed with the other 30 applications, we would have had to go get another application. So then it finally we got to the cost impact. Um, but obviously, with going with 30 applications, there's a lot of um, knowledge that doesn't make it into the system, or it's done one way at one office and done another way. So the value of having everything in one system versus 37 systems played into a huge factor as well. Um, you're putting that one's a little harder to create value on, because you have to take into time of everybody on all different levels, but that's also another way where you can create value. Um, and that's just kind of on the efficiency factor, of where you're creating that value. But I think there's a number of different ways you can do it, but I think you've got to step back ultimately and think through what your initial KPIs are going to be. Because obviously there's a reason behind those KPIs. And I think it's getting back to down to what those problem statements were that you're trying to correct. And I think when you get back to your problem statements and the challenges that you're facing, that's where you're probably going to be able to create the most value, for your project.
And I'm going to have a question about KPIs in a minute, but I want to make sure we get into the record a couple of comments. One gentleman said, a scrum master once told me that change will not occur unless there's a sense of urgency, which with I don't disagree, although it can be hard to maintain that sense of urgency over years. Another gentleman said, I have found that if you do a good job of identifying the drivers and imperatives for the transformation, I can use them as a platform to build buy-in. Maybe you said that in some other language, but I wanted to read that into the record, if you
Yep.
will.
Great.
KPIs. So, for example, in my project, our leader said, I want your team, when the teams are up and running, I want them to be not doing Scrum perfect, but good enough. Well, that wasn't good enough for us. We wanted some KPIs to measure that.
Yeah.
How many people are trained, or do a question to see what level of that. So, can you elaborate more on the specific because KPIs are measurable? Well, you know that,
Yeah.
right? Can you elaborate more on the KPIs you would look at to measure progress, success, value, whatever? Can you give us a small handful?
Yeah, I think, obviously, kind of like what you just talked about, they have like a big, large KPI that's it's that you want to get to at the end of the project. But I think breaking that KPI down, into smaller milestone steps is always, important. So if you have a large, we'll just throw one out there that I typically see. Usually there's a reduction of cost or an increase in margin. Those are pretty common KPIs that I will see with digital transformation projects.
Mm-hmm.
I want to break those down. So, and a lot of that's going to go back to your problem statement from the beginning. Why aren't we hitting those today? So
Mm-hmm.
you know, what do we need to change in order to be able to reduce the cost? It might be eliminating 30 applications. So
Yep.
I'm going to break down that KPI, and I'm going to break it down into milestones as we start to decommission those other, um, applications, or maybe flip them. Sometimes you can't decommission them completely, but we can flip them to read only. So I'm going to start breaking that down into, smaller, KPIs versus going after 30. Let's go after the first five. How do we get rid of the
Agreed.
first five?
Agreed.
Um, and then we'll move up to the next, how do we get to the next five, and just keep it going. I think that, also helps get buy-in not only with your leadership team, but also your end users. When I'm doing those end user, um, interviews and things like that at the beginning of my project or with managers, I usually go target, what are the applications they hate the most? Which ones don't they want to use?
Right.
So let's go after those first. Let's get rid of those. Let's get them off, and then we can, get that win with that team. So, or what are the biggest, what's the biggest pain point with our end users? That
Mm-hmm.
might be the one that I start doing it. Some of the other KPIs that I think are important is, especially if you're looking at software and things like that, is your user adoption. At the end of the day, you're
Right.
not going to
Right.
achieve the KPI if you don't get the user adoption that you need. So I usually have a lot of KPIs that I will set for the project that are around, just my first initial one is number of logins.
Right.
I'm looking for, 60, 80, and then getting up to, into the 90s for logins. And then, I might get that for the initial, and then I'll start looking at repeat logins. And then I'll start to look at, if we're looking at trying to get cost into the system. One of the ways you might get cost into the system is via timesheets. So I might move
Right.
to a metric then is, what percentage of, what I have a percentage of timesheets that I wanted to be submitted on time. And then if I see that we're not hitting that, I'm going to go interview those people that are not submitting on time and figure out why. Why aren't we submitting those on time? So I think, and then you catch those little things where you can make the system more efficient, or we're missing the mark on what we release, so that we can get those addressed in hopefully the next iteration um, of the product. But we can at least take an account for those and look for things. But I think take your big KPIs, break them down into milestones, achievable milestones, create yourself some wins so that you can show progress along the way.
And there's a couple of comments, questions from Michael. He says it's two parts here. First of all, to you, Lindsay, is data analytics part of your digital transformation? And secondly, what outcome metrics are or metrics are used? Maybe you answered the second one, I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
firstly, the data analytics, is that part of your digital transformation? I don't know if that's part of your software or your world or what, but that's the question.
Yeah. Data analytics, I think, plays into any project. I think more so some than others. So I think that gets down into your project specifics. But yeah, I can't think of a project off the top of my head where data analytics hasn't come into play.
Mhm.
So
And the other one about outcome metrics, maybe you've already talked about that with the KPIs.
yeah, I think that's, breaking it down into smaller milestones. And if you're not hitting a KPI, take the time to figure out why. Um, don't just kind of slide it off. Some people are like, oh, we didn't hit that one, but we got, we'll try to hit it the next time with the
Yeah.
next milestone. I'm not, if I don't hit it, I'm going to go figure out why. Because I want to be able to move the needle, and I want to get to the end where we have a successful project and an initiative. So I'm gonna start as soon as we start missing them. I'm gonna go find out why.
And the last question I have, how can I future proof my organization's digital initiative? Can I?
Yeah. I think some of the things, and I talked about this before. If you feel that, if you're ready for a digital transformation project. But I think for starters, you truly need to understand your problem. Why are we taking on this project? You know, when you say digital and transformation projects, that's usually indicates something large in nature, at
Yeah.
least in my experience. So we really want to understand why we're going through this, why we're doing it. I think understanding um, if your organization can also take on this project at this time. More than likely, it's going to have a large change management effect. So making sure that the company has the stomach for it at this point.
Mm.
I also would encourage talking to similar organizations that have gone through similar digital transformation projects. Understand what problems they were trying to solve. Understand what lessons they learned along the way. What worked, what didn't work. Did they ultimately achieve what they set out to do? So that can also, learn from others is always key. I think talking to there's a number of consulting companies out there that can definitely help to, it definitely might warrant bringing and involving one of those in your transformation project, depending on how large it is and how much impact it's going to have to your organization. Um, a lot of the vendors that you're going to work for or work with, I should say, in the industry, for instance, someone like CORA, they've got a lot of people on staff that are familiar with your industries. They've worked with your competitors. So they've seen a lot of these types of products or projects happen before. So they can also be good insight as to what might work, what might not work, give you different variations on how you might actually achieve some of those problems or challenges that you're trying to take care of. Um, I can't say it enough. Know your customer, and a lot of times that's your end users. You know, you really got to get their buy-in on this. Again, if you don't have buy-in throughout the organization, um, I I think you're setting yourself up for failure on that. I think you also need to you ha- you have to be ready for change. No project, especially a multi-month or multi-year project, is going to finish the way you thought it was going to start. So, being able to, I heard creating urgency
Yeah.
from, I forget the exact comment from the Scrum Master, but some of them you're going to have to create some urgency around the changes. But being adaptable to, change the scope when it's urgent to change that scope because it's going to have a ripple effect. Or if you've lost buy-in with something, then you might have to change your scope in order to get back on track. Um, and you've talked about it. Um, I'm a big person on it too. I think an agile approach is the way to go, especially with these large transformation projects. You get out of phase one, get it tested, get it out there, get end user feedback, get those surveys out to end users along the way, and then you kind of learn from them. So just being able to prep for those iterations, get your, when you're um, thinking through your MVP and your iterations, think about the surveys that are going to go along with those as well, so that you can get that real time feedback and then potentially make that change to, get a win or fix a problem sooner rather than later.
And Mark, your signal looks better now. You have anything you want to throw? I'll ask the general audience as well if they want to chat any questions. Actually, there are a couple here. Do you want to? Let me start with the audience if you don't mind, Mark. The question
Yeah,
comes.
go ahead with the audience, Jim.
Okay, Brian says, "How do you overcome managing dependencies across functions and prioritizing work in cadence? For example, a cloud migration may need support from security, data, infrastructure, and business application resources." Good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm dealing with that in my current project that I'm working on with CORA. So we have lots and lots of people. I have 80 people on my customer side's project team. So trying to coordinate 80 people
Mm,
um, is is a challenge at time. Um, they have spun off into various groups. So I have, the person that's in charge of all the integrations and things like that. And some of the lessons learned that we kind of identified it right up front, is, we can have all of these teams, but they got to talk to each other.
right.
So we have been establishing touch points or even individuals that go from one team and they go listen to a team that's going to be supporting or maybe connecting into one of their key milestones or use cases that they're working towards. They're making sure that they kind of get the cross-functional relationship going. Definitely can't have a silo effect in these types of transformation projects. You've got to have those liaisons or at least a governing body where each of the groups come together and talk through the struggles or where they're going to have those needs for the other teams to come into play. Obviously, when you're dealing, at least in my experience, when you're dealing with like the security and all of those are things that we want to get out in front of pretty early. Those might present new requirements when they come through. you know, Data is everything to people, and we've got some creative people out there in the world today, and cybersecurity is constantly changing. So making sure we understand what we need from them sooner rather than later, I think is always pretty key. But I think to kind of go back to the dependency question, I think getting them engaged, making sure that they're talking, don't rely me as a project manager, I'm not going to rely on them doing it. I'm going to orchestrate those calls where they come together and they talk through, raise up the issues, I get a lot of requirements filtered my way, and I know that the other team is going to be impacted. Again, getting them involved so that way they can work through it together and we get the best product at the end of the day.
Mark, do you have one for us? Or I know Lindsay has a couple of closing slides, but see if you have any thoughts or questions that you. I have none in chat right now.
Yeah, I think it was a great presentation by Lindsay. My only question would be, Lindsay, from your experience, you know, do you recommend any digital technology for one to invest in, when doing these kind of digital transformation programs? I mean, do you see anything that you could recommend to us from your experience?
Well, I guess I can't not recommend my own company at the end of the day. So, so I definitely would recommend them. Um, but we'll send you information on CORA later, and I'll go through that. Um, Ultimately, I've used a lot of products throughout my tenure. In 15 years, I couldn't tell you how many different types of project management tools, collaboration tools, all of those that I've used. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the one that everybody's going to adopt to, and that it's the easiest for them to collaborate on. So when I'm working these projects, when take my customer that I'm working with right now, I'm adopting to the tools that they're using today in their organization, what tools they're successful with. I don't want to introduce another tool on top of the tool that we're trying to implement at the end of the day. I
Right.
mean, we don't want to have too many tools in the mix. So I'm typically adopting to those. I would say one of the most common ones that I see, especially in these projects, is probably Microsoft Teams, just with the flexibility and the ability to access it both on your desktop, on you got your desktop app, you've got the web application, you've got the mobile app. So it makes it very easy for people to collaborate and get the information. Um, there's lots of tools like that out there. You could do the Google Suite, same kind of concept where it just allows people to, different mediums that the people can get onto and collaborate with. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's great. But I would first and foremost always encourage, what are you using today that people are comfortable with, familiar with? Go with that. Like, don't make it
And
overcomplicated.
you may have addressed this already, but this question came in the meantime. What would be the key functionalities to look for in a platform? Now, maybe you've discussed the key functionalities non-Quora just then, but maybe Quora or those type of things people are looking for. From Jane sends us that question.
Yeah, I see. I think the key functions that you're looking for depends on what are the problems we're trying to solve. I think you've got to take it back to, and you've probably heard it maybe too many times out of my mouth today, but I really think it's important, is what are the problems you're trying to solve? And that take that from there, and then let's go look for the functionality or the tool that's going to help solve those problems. But I think you gotta take it back to what you're trying to solve at the end of the day.
I think that's right. Too often people say, let's go get this tool, try to get it to work. So wait a minute, why don't we do the requirements first and figure out what we're trying to do, and then see if that tool or a combination of tools will do it. Sometimes it's a combination of things. There are very few, in my humble opinion, one size fits all tools. So it's a thought.
Yep.
Well, hopefully that answers that. Any other questions from the crowd before Lindsay finishes up the rest of her presentation? You can chat them. We have about 10 minutes, 9 minutes or so. Lindsay, do you want to? Well, I'll watch them if you want to bring up your last slide or two.
Yeah, so I'm not sales. I'm not gonna pitch you on Quora, but I will let you know that our marketing team is gonna be sending you out some additional information. So if you were registered for this webinar, you're automatically gonna get this. So we do have just again more, information around just digital. Oh, can't talk after the end of this digital transformation strategy. So you'll get that guide that'll come out to you. And if you want any more information on CORA, or we do host some different podcast style things like that, you can go out to our website, which is down there below, and get all of that information. And of course, if you have any questions directly for me, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. And Mark and Jim, did we publish my email address? Not sure if we did. But if
We
not,
haven't put it on here. I don't know if it was in our initial. Can you put it in chat, Lindsay?
yeah, it definitely can. So
Let
um,
everyone know, right?
yes,
And we'll make sure it gets out there. It's probably up on our LinkedIn. I can't remember.
yeah. So yeah, if you
It's
have,
just easier.
I'll drop that in now. So that's my direct email address if you have any specific questions for me, or you can also venture out to the corasystems.com website.
Mark, I'll turn it back to you. If you're there, I hope you're there. Technical difficulties. Maybe not. Hey, I
Okay,
hear him.
okay, great. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of nuggets you have left us with there, Lindsay. You know, I personally have learned a lot from the presentation, you know.
Mhm.
And so, with 7 minutes, I think, I mean, do you have anything else that you would like to share with the audience? I know from the conversation that you know in different communities, you have like persons, trying to understand what's the difference between like digital transformation versus digital adoption, and we've touched many points today. So as our final point, do you have any nuggets that you'd like to share with us, Lindsay, and on what your thoughts on digital transformation versus digital adoption, just in case if there's any person in the audience that is a little bit confused about what the difference is.
I think, in my opinion, I think digital, the digital outcome or digital, what did you say was your digital transformation, and what was it? I'm adding words as I was thinking through your
Digital
question.
adoption. Digital
The digital adoption.
adoption.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think digital adoption is the outcome of digital transformation.
Okay, makes sense.
Um, so I think your transformation is, what are we changing? What are we doing to get there? And then you've got your digital adoption comes as a result of your digital transformation. If you go through and you kind of, I think hone in on, again, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Why are we doing this transformation project in the first place? And then we've talked about it. I've seen it. I flipped over to chat. I've been ignoring chat during this conversation, but I just flipped over there and I see a lot on getting buy-in. And I 100% agree. You got to get a buy-in. You get that buy-in, you're going to get that digital adoption.
Agreed.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Lindsay. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for coming out. We really appreciate you. And don't forget that we will be following up with you guys by email. And please check out the PMO Leader website, the PMOleader.com, for all your materials regarding project management and the project management office. Feel free to check it out, guys. A lot of free stuff there for your personal and your professional development. So thanks again, guys, for coming out today. Thanks again, Lindsay, for sharing such your insightful experiences and your wisdom in the era of digital transformation. Thanks again.
Yep,
Bye,
thanks.
My
guys.
pleasure.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, y'all.